Welcome, everyone, to today's session on the question whether maritime strategy needs big guns. I'm Sebastian Bruns. I'm a visiting fellow at the Royal Navy Strategic Studies Center in Portsmouth in the UK, but I'm based in Kiel in Germany. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you, each and every one of you, as we discuss 40 years ago the inaugural visit of the battleship USS Iowa to Kiel. She was the lead ship of a class of four massive World War II era battleships, and when she sailed into Kiel just this week ago, just this week 40 years ago, she passed the famous maritime memorial in Laboe, and it must have been quite a sight to see. She and her three sister ships were recommissioned in the 1980s as part of the US Maritime Strategy and its accompanying 600 ship Navy program. This was her first visit to the Baltic Sea, and it was designed to demonstrate that the Baltic Sea area, then a front line in the Cold War, was by no means a Russian lake. To that end, a live firing exercise was held east of the Danish island of Bornholm. Arguably, it was the new guided missile cruiser USS Ticonderoga that accompanied her on one of her first deployments that shocked the Soviets a little bit more. The Aegis system was a game changer in the correlation of forces, as it turned out. The Iowa's visit also served the important purpose of signaling American intent and capabilities to its allies, namely Denmark and West Germany. The Baltic Sea is a confined and shallow water with very particular limitations for capital ships in the Cold War and today. Here to take us back to the 1980s and to then build a bridge to today's maritime security and strategic situation are two experts, and I'm very glad we can welcome them here today. First, we have Larry Seaquist, who is an American politician, a retired US Navy captain, and an academic. From 1986 to 1988, he commanded the Iowa, right in between her two visits in Kiel in 85 and 89. And of course, before the infamous turret explosion in the Caribbean in 1989 that killed 47 sailors. During Larry's command, he and the ship operated in the North Sea, in the Norwegian Sea, and in the Arctic. We look forward to him describing what it means to take a 60,000 ton behemoth through operations on the northern flank, and also speak to the larger strategic aspects of his quote-unquote view from the bridge. Comments today are being provided by my colleague Johannes Peters, my former ISPK colleague Johannes Peters, who's a political scientist from Eckernförde and heads the Department of Maritime Strategy and Security at the Institute for Security Policy at Kiel University at ISPK. And he and my other former colleague Hendrik Schilling have graciously agreed to host this event, which will later be found on YouTube. Johannes focuses on shadow fleets and all kinds of Baltic Sea shenanigans these days, looking out for what the Russian ships are doing off Fehmarn and off the German coast. He will comment on today's situation of the Baltic Sea and what it takes to address the contemporary threats. At the end of the day, they're asking the question or looking at answering the question whether we need capital ships or even battleships back in the Baltic Sea. This will be followed by Q&A. And I look forward to the event, which will last roughly about an hour. And without further ado, Larry, you have the floor for your opening presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian, and hello to everyone. I look forward to the discussion with Johannes and the discussion among us. My own credentials for speaking about sailing in the Baltic come from the fact that I once commanded a glass of red wine aboard the Stockholm to Helsinki ferry. 2 weeks before that, I had been in San Diego in command of the destroyer David R. Ray, operating daily at sea in refresher training. So here I was aboard this ferry, astonished to find that the forward bulkhead of the deckhouse was a giant plate glass window. So you could sit there on the O1 level with a glass of wine and enjoy the Baltic and the Swedish and Finnish coastline. What I thought today was to quickly take a look back, as Sebastian said, about the experience of battleships in the Baltic region, particularly North Sea, then to look around about capital ships today, and then conclude with briefly looking ahead at the kind of the geopolitical military strategy terrain ahead of us. Now, Iowa, as Johannes said, Iowa was recommissioned and fairly quickly sailed to Baltops 85, made that Kiel visit. My predecessor, the plank owner CO, Jerry Janeko, did a wonderful job of getting the ship in the water and the crew organized. He was just spectacularly successful. And the Navy sailed that new ship, new crew, up to Baltops 85. As interesting as it was for our allies and for the Sovs, it was also very important just for the crew to be underway, away from home port, thinking about those kinds of operations, an important step forward in their development. When I arrived a year later, I participated in Northern Wedding 86. I had the pleasure of sailing the ship up the Elbe, 100 kilometers up to Hamburg. And I still remember how interesting it is to sail through farmland on both sides on your way up to Hamburg with a large ship. That Northern Wedding also let me act as the Orange Force commander for a while. And as Sebastian mentioned, I was able to take Iowa all the way to Svalbard. So I think Iowa holds the record as the northernmost battleship by any Navy anytime. I was back in the Norwegian Sea after, in 1987, we were on our way, Battleship Iowa, to Operation Earnest Will in the Persian Gulf, Straits of Hormuz. I got almost into Marseille one night and got an order from the high command saying, turn off all of your radios and radars, go radio silent, and go to the Norwegian Sea now. So we turned everything off, went back out to Gibraltar, up through the English Channel, North Sea, and into the Norwegian Sea. The Sovs, of course, went nuts, which was the purpose of the trip, is to simply pull the chain and see what they would do when this capital ship disappeared. That was one more example, I think, of us looking at what capital ships, that the Sovs needed to track them, that they had to wait. One thing during that trip, as we went through the North Sea, I was firing every day I could to get the guns operational. So I did fire at Dogger Bank in a live fire exercise in honor of the Russians from 1905. And then I went to the scene of the Battle of Jutland, and we live fired both sides of the battle using both the German and the British firing plan. So we could understand for ourselves these different ways of controlling major caliber gun. What you see when you operate in the North Sea in these confined waters is that you've got a symphony of firepower, got enormous firepower with the guns, but you're also in very complicated political terrain. Who controls what, where, who your relationships with change constantly. So let me jump ahead. I also want to mention FIBSTRAT. Later on, in fact, it was before my time in Iowa, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Watkins, looking at the maritime strategy, I'd been involved with the maritime strategy. Admiral Watkins said one day as we were briefing him on the latest developments, okay, I understand why I have a Navy. I can tell the Congress what everything is for, except for amphibs and Marines. What do we have amphibs for, and what do Marines do? So I went to work with, in the next global war game, and war gamed the use of a Marine division into Kiel, backed up by battleships. Now, you may recall, this is ancient history for many of you, I'm sure. Back in the old days, we expected that the Soviets, when they came through the Fulda Gap, would have on the right side of the attack an element that would turn right, go through Kiel, up the Danish peninsula, and try to control Scandinavia. The question was, could we get in there fast enough with a Marine division to block that right flank move? And that led me to understanding personally much more of the kind of the local dynamics of battles in that area. So at any rate, that that kind of set of experiences led me to a feeling that capital ships in that region have a lot of value. Let me shift and just ask ourselves, can we carry those ideas forward to today? If, as the president said, we had a battleship recommissioned, would it be useful? There are four reasons why I would suggest that capital ships are valuable today. One is that the fact that a president would mention it. What a capital ship is an asset that is tracked in the American case, is tracked in the White House Situation Room. Does the White House know where you are? Does it care where you are? And the idea with battleships was to add to the carriers these four battleships to give us much more maneuverability on the checkerboard. So we didn't have to open any crisis by playing the carrier first. You could play a battleship as a geostrategic marker without using one of your carriers. So it's a strategic piece on the geostrategic board. Second, of course, is the firepower. A battleship is a symphony of firepower. You've got everything from the long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles out several hundred miles, the harpoons, the 16-inch guns out to 30 or 32 kilometers, 5-inch guns. It's an orchestra with lots of instruments in it. Another part of being a capital ship is the staying power. You've got lots of fuel, you have armor, you also have a huge self-repair capability. So a battleship can take a licking and keep on ticking, as they used to say. That ability to stay on station in contested waters, I think, is an important piece of being capital. And then finally, perhaps the most an underrated part of a battleship is the citizen crew power. A battleship is equipped with skills about everything. The chief's mess, 65 in my case, those chief petty officers, master chiefs, senior chiefs, they knew everything. Young sailors were learning from experts who had worked hard to get aboard the ship. And so I think when we put the ship into a region, you put the sailors ashore, you're sending ashore the very best, a strategic asset itself. So in my view, I've always felt that the battleships were built 50 years too early. They were not dinosaurs. They were not just a pretty face. The modern battleship, if you could somehow levitate it into operations today, would indeed, in my view, be a key fleet asset. They would be useful. Now, let me finish by looking further ahead than today. Andy Marshall, as you recall, with his sense of the inevitable evolution of of warfare, revolutions and military affairs. I think that we may be at a place where no matter how confident we are in our thinking right now, I wonder whether the nature of warfare is fundamentally changing, and not just in the military technical sense. A way to think about this, perhaps, I'd offer you this for your thought, is that the boundaries between the military and civilian, between what's on the battlefield and what's not on the battlefield are dissolving. They're not dissolving in Ukraine specifically. You can clearly see Ukraine or Gaza where the fighting is and where it's not. But other than those places, I think, and the work that Johannes and others are doing here, just looking at Soviet ships that are Russian ships, are Russian ships that may or may not be flagged according to their actual ownership. Um, it is dissolving this clarity about what's military and what's not. The combatants, as you look around the world at various conflict places, combatants are increasingly kind of Teflon command. You don't know who's in charge. It's hard to get rid of them. Certainly, the weapons are changing. Iowa, we operated the world's first drones with the Pioneer system back in starting in '87. So drones are not new. Uh, and my timer is saying it's time for me to get to the end of this, and I am. Our military weaponry, I think, is evolving. What a weapon is evolving, and I'd finally close with the idea for you that even nukes may be becoming obsolete. You look at the Russians yesterday and the day before trying to brandish nuclear weapons, and we're all saying, "Oh yeah, thank you, Putin. Uh, we know what you're trying to do." I wonder. So I'm thinking that as we consider capital ships and the combinations of forces that would be politically useful in the times ahead, we may need to rethink how you make strategies, who strategists are, what procedures we use to actually concoct our game plans for the situations ahead. So I'll close with that and ask my line handlers to single up. We're ready to sail as soon as you tell us to get underway.
Thank you very much, Larry. As to be expected from a seasoned naval officer and navalist, this was on time and on point. Thank you very much for giving us a lot of insights and a lot of food for thought. And we look forward to the Q&A, which will follow shortly. And before we turn to Johannes, and I believe he and I will, or he shares hopefully my assessment that we are no longer worried so much about a Russian landing amphibious landing
Right.
in Kiel, as much as we are worried about Shadow Fleet and tankers and drones that are checking out our critical infrastructure and our military bases and everything else. And I'm sure he agrees as well that the tough job of going to these U.S. Navy receptions during Kiel Week every year has changed dramatically when from the Mount Whitney, which is a fine ship, but she's not very threatening, to the U.S. capital ships that sometimes now pull into the Baltic Sea in lieu of a real battleship, I should say. We had the USS Kearsarge here in 2022 and the USS New York in 2024. And so I turn to him for some thoughts on the current situation in the Baltic Sea as he sees this, and perhaps offering some suggestions where we should go and whether we need to bring back battleships.
Yes, thank you, Sebastian, for handing this over to me, and thank you, Larry, for your insights. And it's kind of struggling how to bring my thoughts and connect them to what you just said. And also hello to everybody else. I know most of you actually, so it's good to have you around. Okay, let's start with the situation in the Baltic Sea particularly, and we've discussed this a bit before you other guys joined, Larry, Sebastian, and I. So we currently have a kind of a different situation, not only due to the fact that Finland and Sweden assessed NATO, which of course altered the strategic calculus within the Baltic Sea and the strategic landscape as well. But for arguable reasons, the Baltic Sea is not and has not become a NATO lake yet, because it's not the fact that NATO has complete sea control in the Baltic Sea, and it will never have due to the capabilities Russia is still fielding in the region. And that's probably the the aspect that is often overlooked by let's say, less sophisticated experts than gathered here today. That geography does matter for sure, in particular in the Baltic Sea. But just the fact that we do have the geography in our favor now does not mean that we control the Baltic Sea at all. In fact, the challenges are quite different. So Larry, you argued and rightfully made the point that the Soviet Union was supposed to actually break out of the Baltic Sea and to get into the North Sea and actually to do this right flank move to capture Scandinavia as well. And that was actually what the defense of the Baltic, from a NATO perspective, was designed to tackle, right? So especially the German Navy was designed to actually take the fight as far away from German homelands and to bring as much attrition to the Soviet fleet as possible until the big decks would have arrived or the reinforcements would have arrived. And now we have a completely different picture. The challenge we do have now is actually to keep the Baltic Sea open as long as possible for our reinforcement to reach the Baltic Sea, the Baltic states and Finland, and that brings a different challenge. So we have to be there actually in a perfect situation. We are there before a crisis occurs. So we have to be east of Bornholm most of the time. We have to be present there, as we are currently with Baltic Sentry and Baltic Sentinel. But due to the threat environment we're currently facing, the surface assets are under enormous threat when they come into the Baltic. They're under an air threat, under a land-based threat, and long precision fires. So that's the challenge for surface assets in the Baltic Sea is probably much higher than it was back in the day. So it's pretty different, and the role is different too, I think, beside of keeping the Baltic Sea open for transfers, for reinforcements. What the point you made, and I'm happy that you mentioned the Marine Division. We're not planning with a large amphibious assault probably in the Baltic states anymore, right? It's more like, so we don't need the big guns to actually back this up to provide naval gunfire support. We see actually we're planning for like things of like amphibious raid, so we have to be more distributed, we have to be faster, we have to be more agile to constantly create new dilematas from the sea for the Russians, for them to tackle, actually, that they not can bring to bear their capabilities they have in the Kaliningrad Oblast and in their what they call their Western Military District. So the kind of dilematas we have to create now are different from the dilematas that we needed to create back in the 1980s, and that's why probably big decks are not they're not obsolete for sure, but when you look at the plannings of especially of the navy's focus on the Baltic Sea, like the German Navy is to a good proportion. Beside the blue water capabilities, we also need to field. But when we look at the plans made by the German Navy and currently laid out in this Course 2025 booklet they just brought out, it's one of the terms there is mass matters, right? And mass is not created by tonnage, by one single ship providing a lot of tonnage, but it's created by a lot of platforms that are actually able to sum up as a mass. These platforms need to be fast, need to be agile, and they need to be manned when they need to be manned. But a good portion of them needs to be unmanned, because the big challenge navies facing currently is actually two things. One thing is techflation, so building a manned surface asset and having it up to date when it comes to system and sensors is a pretty costly thing. So you can't generate state-of-the-art mass without like draining your budget in an insufficient way. So you have to you have to still have to rely on these very potential sophisticated crewed surface assets, but you have to combine them with unmanned systems who are cheap, who are dispensable, who are and then you have to combine them in the best possible way. And that's actually the approach most navies are currently trying to get to, actually, and the German Navy in particular, to actually create this mass by combining unmanned and manned assets. And that's probably the reason why, at least for a non-global navy, like most navies are, big decks are not on the priority list, very much on top of their priority list, because they're pretty expensive and you only have a few assets then. You mentioned your carriers, and you know what, 13 billion one carrier is quite a bit of money. So that's one thing. It's cost, and it's maintaining the technological edge on these big decks. And the other thing is crewing, obviously, right? I mean, you know better than I. The Iowa had around roughly 1,500 sailors aboard, and we even struggle to man our platforms with 150 sailors or so. So having big ships requiring, even nowadays with a lot of automatization and all this kind of stuff, but you still need them for what we call inneres Gefecht, so the damage control, basically. There's a certain limit to automatization, and crewing the vessels, even the relatively few numbers we have now, has become quite of a challenge. So it's not only having these ships, but crew them in a proper way is a huge challenge, and that's why probably there's a huge appetite as well for going unmanned rather than for going big and manned. So that might be my 2 cents before I lose myself, and I will leave some time for the Q&A. And yeah, happy to interact with you guys.
Thank you very much, Johannes, for this excellent commentary, and in particular for bringing the focus also to both the unmanned, uncrewed issue, as well as crewing, and which contains, of course, retention. Larry, your Wikipedia entry says that you had a very novel way of leading the ship, namely by getting everyone from the ship's company to sing a song over the 1MC, which is the entire ship. So maybe that's something that we need to start doing. Get people to sing songs, and maybe they'll not only join the Navy, but they also they'll sign up again. But who knows? It's worth a try. So thanks again for your two perspectives, and we have 30 minutes for comments and questions. Please raise your hand if you have something to contribute, and if you would be so kind to introduce yourself briefly, that would be very helpful. Any first takers? Randy, thank you.
Yes, thanks very much, Randy Papadopoulos. Currently not working in Washington, D.C., but my own views expressed today. I wonder, Larry, you alluded to the fact that you were able to use unmanned systems off of the deck of the Iowa and for gunfire spotting. To what extent do you think the current environment, and you mentioned Ukraine as well, really does emphasize sort of the balance that we need between the small end that both you and Johannes talked about, the small end assets, and the firepower that a battleship or a large warship, that we're not going to recommission the battleships, but the large warship brings to the fight. And what extent, where can we sort of make distinctions about the sort of balance that we need between these two types of platforms? And to what extent can that be managed from ashore? I'm thinking here about the fact that there's a relatively new headquarters set up in Rostock, that is a NATO maritime headquarters for the Baltic. And do all these things need to be orchestrated from ashore, or can they be done from sea? And I ask this because I'm simply not aware of what can work.
It probably, Randy, is situational dependent. For example, I can think back to Operation Earnest Will in the Straits of Hormuz, where I had an Air Force 1-star on board as my deputy commander, trying to integrate forces. We were informally coordinating with some allied navies, but not formally operating together. It's probably going to depend on the situation. On the command and control side, and these days, of course, with command and control, we all feel like we're being controlled from somebody from the Admiral's command center. They're looking over everybody's shoulder all the time. On the firepower side, we need, I think, to keep in mind what the Israelis have done with 2,000-pound bombs in Gaza. A 16-inch shell is about the same impact, and gunnery still has an enormous value. We've only got those big 16-inch guns at hand, and those not really available. But I don't think that we've completely necessarily moved out of the era of big guns.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, just add a few about the headquarters in Rostock. It's currently, because I just spoke to the chief of staff there, and basically every NATO warship that enters the Baltic Sea is actually guided from there, commanded from there. So as soon as it enters the Baltic Sea, and even the US ships who are a bit more reluctant when it comes to handing over command, as you know, but they are receiving a very, very close advice. Let's call it that way.
Sure.
So that's what this headquarters actually doing, and they're doing pretty well, I think. So I think they're quite happy with the way they actually set up and develop. And I've heard this from several pointed person that it's actually is performing pretty well.
And I wouldn't personally have any problems with being, steered just like in an aircraft with air traffic controller, with the headquarters telling me where they needed me to be.
So that's what Rostock is doing. I think when it comes to the point from where actually the orders should be given in regard of when you bring uncrewed system into the field, I think it depends on what purpose for. So with the German corvettes, they do have an uncrewed kind of a helicopter drone for over the horizon targeting and stuff like that. That is something which is be done from the ship because they are the only ones that can actually say whether they need it or not. So it depends on what kind of effect you actually want to create, and then what kind of drone you bring to bear. I think that's the important question you always have to ask, whether it's done by the ship or it's done from anybody else. When I think the point you make regarding fires, Larry, it's still a valid point, but I think it's probably more valid point when it comes to deterrence. Right? Having these assets and making your opponent believe that you're actually willing to use these assets, which have an enormous impact if you use them. That's probably the more important thing, because firepower is not as exclusive as it used to be. And that's probably so the thing is having it and making somebody else believe you're going to use it is probably the more important thing.
Yeah, the verb is to shape. Can you use these forces to shape events, to shape how things evolve?
Thank you very much. We have a comment in the comment section, which I'll share for the group here. It's by Reinhard Unruh, a retired colonel of the German Army. And he writes, I was on the Iowa when she was in Kiel, and I was very much impressed. However, today it would be out of time. What we need today are smaller ships with state-of-the-art weapons. We also need, quote unquote, drone carriers. Just look at the geography of the Baltic. It is not suitable for capital ships. Think of long-range missiles, which could sink any battleship with one shot. Any comments on that, other than a thumbs up, I think, from this group?
No, that's all true. That's why I really asked, what are the characteristics of a capital ship? Because I do think whatever its size and equipment, you want it to be politically significant, have significant firepower, however that's delivered. Uh, I think crewing, the fact that it's a set of national human beings there has political weight in many cases. But I certainly take the Colonel's point.
Thank you. As we gather for one last round of question, I'm curious. I'm asking this to both Larry and Johannes with as much leeway as you want to answer it, either from Larry from your 1980s experience or from today, and Johannes from your view. What kind of scenarios keep you up, or Larry, what kind of scenarios kept you up while you commanded the Iowa? And Johannes, for you, what kind of scenarios, what keeps you up at night thinking about the Baltic?
Go first, Larry.
Well, first of all, I used to get up in the middle of the night and wander around the ship. I believe in command by wandering around. And at about 3 a.m., it was very useful to drop by the bakery. We had with that large crew, we had a splendid set of cooks and particularly really good bakers. And at about 0300, it was important that the captain tested the quality of the daily donut production. So it is useful to get around the ship. Go ahead, Johannes.
Yeah, I think that okay. I was just reading Tom's comment. So what keeps me up at night? I still have a pretty good sleep, actually. At least my wife tells me that every morning, so it must be true. What we are most confronted with currently, so in my daily job, which is in some way explaining the current situations to the broader public, and the most requests I get from the media, for example, are either regarding the Shadow Fleet, or they are regarding the drones or the airspace incursions. So it's and then it comes to resilience, probably. Right. So the main thing that keeps me actually up is that I, for myself, think that especially the German population is still or far from being resilient enough to actually tackle the challenges imposed on us by Russia with its cognitive or information warfare, and that tackles the very heart of our society. And I was traveling, as I've told you, Larry, I was traveling the Baltic states earlier this month, and it's a complete different ballgame there when it comes to resilience, and when it comes to the way officials are able to address the threats imposed by Russia, and the way the mindset of the population, when you call it that way. And that's something which which sometimes gives me a bit of a headache when I see the lack of knowledge, of public knowledge about the actual current situation we are facing, about the hybrid attacks we are under every day, and the perception actually of the situation by parts of our population. That is something which really worries me from time to time. Yeah.
And Sebastian, if I may add on a couple of thoughts. One, as a commanding officer of a large ship with a large crew, the thing that really was always with me is, have I helped the crew get ready for the next event? Am I far enough ahead of where we are now? so that the crew will be able to manage. They will just automatically take themselves into that next situation. The other side of this, the thing that really bothered me, however, and I've got some specific examples, is the fuzziness of direction from the high command. And this may be amplified as I think about it by this idea we've just been talking about, that the CO is an automaton under the electronic command of somebody sitting at a console in a headquarters someplace. You look at the absolute mystery behind the U.S. operations in the Caribbean, now the Pacific. I've wondered, what was the command environment like? Who was making those decisions? I can recall taking Battleship Iowa. I emerged out of the Suez, came down through the Red Sea. I was headed for Diego Garcia and then back up to the Persian Gulf. And I got my op orders. I'd changed commands and I got my op order. It's eagerly reading the famous paragraph 3 about what you're there for. And there was no information. I knew more from the newspapers about why I was there than I did from the text of the op order. And I basically, to tell the truth, I invented a mission, a narrative for a mission to tell the crew, so the crew could tell their families about why we're there. I was accurate. I knew why we were there, but I had to create that. And as I fast forward to these days, with this mysterious electronic command, players that you don't know, in a world that is not cleanly managed by a disciplined military chain of command. I just wonder what those orders were. Where did they come from? What did they intend to do? And so that may be something that we should also be thinking about, is what are the instructions? Is it clear? Not the whole world will not just be computer operated drones. At least I hope not.
Thank you very much to both of you for your responses. We have another comment in the comment section. That's where they are, and it comes from Tom Duffy, who's a retired State Department official. And while we're at it, his forthcoming book is on the tanker war. It'll be out early next year, and his comment is something for the naval historians here in the virtual room. Quote: "Did we ever get a sense from the Soviets how they viewed our US battleships, what they said to each other? In other words, has there been any intel as to how they viewed capital ships, or did they differentiate between carriers and battleships?" Anyone who wants to take a jab at that?
We might ask David. I see Dr. David Rosenberg is on. He may have a sense. My own feeling at the time was that the Soviets very much did know and pay attention to where I was, what we were doing, and they clearly distinguished between a battleship and a carrier. And that little demonstration that I was ordered to do of disappearing and reappearing up in the Norwegian Sea was an example of that. But
Larry,
yes, go ahead.
let me add on. The Soviets paid more attention to the battleships because of the TLAMs with nuclear warheads than they would have to almost anybody else, any other surface warfare ship, in part because of the fact that while there was some enthusiasm for putting TLAM ends on spruances and so forth, the armored box launchers and so forth, it never really went very far. But certainly for the four Iowas, there was clearly a worry about that, and it shows up in that famous map of the threat to the motherland that the Russians put out. And we emphasized that
Thank you very much, Dave. Pleasure to have your commentary on this issue and to welcome you aboard here as well. Looking at the time, we have about 10 more minutes for what could be one last round of questions or comments. But if there aren't any, and I don't see any at this point, then thank you, Randy. One more comment. I really appreciate it. We need to make the most of our time here. Thank you very much.
I got a million of them, as they say in the stand-up comedians world. No, to what extent then should we say that we're thinking about shore-based fires influencing events at sea? Because the Baltic is a constrained water space that is going to, and even a shallow sea as well. So that means that shore-based effects, maybe not a Marine Corps division, but a Marine Corps littoral regiment could do something based in Sweden, based in Poland. These things are much more capable than they would have been. Their analog would have been 40 years ago in terms of exerting sea denial, perhaps not necessarily sea control, but sea denial in the Baltic. Thanks.
Thank you, Randy. Before we get to those answers, Federica Wolf, please.
Okay, hang on. My video is still loading. There we go. Or we should, yeah. I'm a little bit of the odd one out here, I'm afraid. It leads us away from the main topic a little.
Okay, do you want to pose your question now, or should we just wait for?
Oh, well, to make it short, I'm in political education, and I'm planning an event for 11th to 13th graders, which who will be, well, the way it looks like now, part of the military service that we are going to have in a few years. And my question is basically what my message or your message to them should be when it comes to what Johannes said earlier, the resilience that the public needs and the knowledge, the pieces of knowledge that they require.
An absolutely fascinating question, very important one. While those couldn't be farther apart, shore-based fires and how to what kind of transmission we need for the narratives. I think we've got two speakers who are individually well qualified to discuss both of them. So who wants to go first, Larry or Johannes, or anyone who in the audience who feels compelled to for their 2 cents?
My own thought is, and some of you, I'd be interested in your thinking. It's easy for us to imagine in the fairly near future an automaton world where the instruments of war are all robots and computers. I still believe that human beings, to take the naval example, human beings embarked at sea in international waters, in a warship, a combatant in international waters, have a political value. They are chess pieces that are movable on an international political board. And that will be useful in a way that merely having a drone is not. There's something different about the politics of the international politics of having a national combatant in international waters that is movable, opposed, say, to trying to put a Marine brigade or an Army division someplace. So I still think ahead, and that means then, for me, you wouldn't just have a bunch of sailors in small boats. I still think the idea of what a capital ship is, that it is something that shows up in the national command centers as a significant chess piece will be useful ahead.
Yes, I completely agree with you, because it's a different political signal you're sending when you demonstrate that you're willing to put people into harm's way, actually, to for your political objective. It's something different than just sending some piece of metal. And that's one of the big discussions going on when you're talking about unmanned, right? How will the deterrence aspect actually be evolve when we're talking about unmanned, and is there any deterrence coming from an unmanned system? So that's a pretty valid point you make there. Randy, regarding the question of which basically goes to amphibious raid rather than amphibious assault. That's when I talk to people involved into amphibious operations nowadays, that's actually all they talk about. It's about amphibious raid. It's not about sea control. It's about sea denial, or it's about even sea denial for probably a couple of hours instead of days or weeks, right? Having a narrow street deny to an opponent as long as I need for like bringing kit over or whatever is a valid aspect of sea denial, especially when it comes to a contested sea space like the Baltic Sea. Friederike, good to have you around. As most of you know, Friederike and I graduated together from what you would call high school. So, and nice to see you, Friederike. That's an easy question to tackle in probably 5 minutes. But I think what I experience when I talk to younger people is actually they know what actually military service means, and they are actually willing to do this and willing to take risks, but they need a purpose, and just serving because you have to is not a decent purpose. And that might be probably was a bit different 40 years ago. I'm not quite sure. But nowadays, to convince young, smart, ambitious people to actually embrace into something and actually to actually give dedication to something, you need to give them a purpose. But I think the younger generation is quite aware that the freedom and the way of life they actually enjoyed in their now as young or are enjoying as young people is not a given anymore. It's not a given anymore regard to the rogue behavior of Russia. It's not a given anymore regard of climate change. There are a lot of challenges to their way of life, and they actually, I think, they are willing to work for that, or to actually maybe sacrifice something for that, if they see a decent purpose. And that's, I think, the main thing we have to actually address to younger people. What is the purpose? Why we need you to actually invest a year of your young life to actually give something back to the society you're living in, and what actually is taking the society out of it. What's the reason why we want this to do? That's, I think, probably the most important thing.
And boy, I certainly agree with that, Johannes. From my political life, I also can testify that our young generations have a powerful sense of service, but we are not offering them a rationale. What is it that a military force is for? The U.S. Navy right now hasn't got a clue about why it exists. And more, I think the important thing is that we need to rethink the way we've come up with strategies, strategic rationale. Who is a strategist? What do you do in order to fashion a strategic vision for a service or a company or a country? How that's done, I think that also needs to be reinvented, not just with uniform military responding to whatever is the threat du jour. We've been coasting, in the American case, on the Chinese threat as a substitute for thinking. And I think that thinking now, to connect with those young people, has to come from some fresh thinking about strategic purposes.
Thank you very much. And if I may add, I think the maritime sphere and navies really lend themselves to this kind of discussion. In the case of your question, I think an objective could already be to convey the understanding that navies are not just the military is not just a military tool; it's part of a political toolbox. And certainly, as a parliamentary army that we have in Germany, we should get beyond this kind of traditional, military versus political or military versus diplomatic schism. The military is part of wider political and policy, and for young people to understand that, in particular, navies. I'm trying not to make too much of an advertisement for navies, but this case, just bringing people here to discuss anything from drones to big battleships to the political aspects shows you the kind of across the spectrum, across the board opportunities and limitations of navies, which are, again, their own special case. But this is, I think, something in line with what Johannes and Larry just said. It needs a purpose, and the purpose can't just simply be something that's top down. It needs to grow bottom up, and that's why teachers have such an instrumental role in conveying what is important, and giving these young people the opportunity to arrive at their own conclusions at the end of the day. So, Adrian Neumann for one final question or comment, and then we'll close this session for good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. After I lifted my hand, you nearly spelled everything already out. I just wanted to add to the question from Friederike. As you know, my core focus in my research I did at ISPK was on societal resilience. And Larry mentioned the word purpose, which of course is very important. I want to drive it more down to meaning. You need to control or be able to shape meaning of events. And that means who you are, what you're fighting for, what this fight is about. And as long as we allow, and Johannes raised this before, his concerns that we do not control our information space, and it's all the time under attack and influenced, where opponents try to destroy this kind of meaning and throw shit against the wall. So yes, I think it's a very important topic Friederike is on. And Friederike, if you're interested to follow this up on what it means for education, Johannes has my contacts. I'm happy to spare the with you. Thank you. And excellent event. And thanks.
Thank you, Adrian, for your kind words, for your commentary as well. That leads us indeed to the end of this session. I really appreciate everyone participating here today. Thank you to those who spoke up or who put their thoughts in the commentary box. In particular, thank you so much to Larry Seaquist and to Johannes Peters for being here today and for providing their thoughts and comments on these issues, for crossing the divide that exists between history and political science. And thank you so much indeed also for hosting this particular Hendrik Schilling. Thank you so much for doing this. We are now closing this event. We are stopping the recording. Hendrik, if you would be so kind.